Hi there, it's Mr. Clark. Welcome to lesson 3.1.4 on simple interbeat elongations. So we've talked about simple, moving with the feeling of twos. We talked about elongations, where you're extending a note across a boundary that we have previously left untouched. And now it's just interbeat instead of intrabeat. Interbeat was within a single beat. Interbeat crosses from beat to beat. Imagine that. So, from macro beat to macro beat, to be more specific, big beat to big beat, there are 8 possible simple interbeat elongation patterns. 8 sounds like a lot. Most of them are just variations on each other. So, here our first one, we have 1D, D. So what we've done is we've taken 2 pairs of 8th notes, and we've just tied the middle 2 together. So 1D, 2, D. 1D, D, 1D, D, 1D, D, 1D, D. And we're considering it now rather than saving it until our tie unit because often you will see it written like this, where the quarter note does cross between macro beats. There's a macro beat hidden in this quarter note that you just have to be able to recognize this as a single pattern in order to count successfully. 1D, D. Then you can replace one or both of these 8th notes with 16th notes. So that's how you get this pattern. 1 ka D, D me, 1 ka D, D me. That's how you get this pattern. 1 ka D, D, 1 ka D, D. And also this pattern. 1 D, D me, 1 D, D me. Here you have a dotted quarter note and an 8th note. 1, D, 2, I'm sorry, 1, D3, D1, D3. It would not be correct to say 2 here, because 1, D2, D3, that beat 2 is hidden within the dot. Same thing here, where you can turn the 8th note into 2/16. 1, D me 2, 1, D me 3, D me 1, D me 3. Here we have 1D, 3D, 1D, 3D. And you can turn that 8th note into 2/16. 1 ka D, 3 ka D, 1 ka D, 3 ka D. And yeah, then I note down here that each of these patterns hides a microbeat somewhere within the visual notes. And it's important to feel this macrobeat. 1 ka D, D me, 1 ka D, D me, 1 ka D, D me. If you don't feel where that hidden macrobeat is, you will most likely not be successful at saying the rhythm as precisely as possible. So that's what's going on here. And let me just pull up a couple examples. Where are we? Here we go. Sure, this will work. Where am I? There we go. Okay. So looking at line 1, we have 1 D, D, 1 ka D, D, 1, me 2 D, 1. Line 2, we have some of the other kinds. 1 D, D, 1 D, D me, 1 ka, 2 ka, 1 D, 2. Line 3 and 4 are in cut time. Exactly the same principle applies, just all of the note values are doubled. So instead of a dotted quarter note, we have a dotted half note. Instead of 16ths, we have 8ths, etc., etc. So line 3 would sound like this. 1 D, 1 D me, 1 ka D, 2 me, 1 ka D me, 2 ka D. So that's what's going on there. That's what I have for now. I will see you next time.